like you, Bill. I just your mom. I know you're good. He's you. I love my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters.
I know that Christ lives and that he loves me. And I know beyond a
shadow of a doubt that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God.
I know.
All right, here we go. Microphone is getting set up.
Sweet.
So let's start then. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Beyond a Doubt podcast. Today we have a real treat for y'all. My cousin. This is Jefferson Cloward on the other end. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jefferson?
Well, I'm 36 years old, and I'm a man who lives in Texas. I don't know what you want me to say.
Well, tell us a little bit about your blog.
Yeah, I've blogged off and on for about 10 years, and the one that's relevant to this was called The Accidental Atheist, if that's what you're talking about, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on that I kind of explored what my path was and just wanted to explain it in a way that was accessible to family and friends in a non sort of confrontational way for the purpose of understanding. And that was that blog. And now I'm not on that anymore, but it's just myname.com is where I have all my stuff. So right. I still post some things relevant to that.
JeffersonCloward.com.
Yeah.
People should check it out. He has a way with words. He really does. So I have a question. I know that you went on a mission, and I've heard stories from you about how you really did give this thing a shot. Now, did you have an actual testimony that the church was true when you were in the thick of it?
Yeah. It actually surprised me when I got a little older and I heard people say things like, it'd be rare that people would admit this, but they'd say something like, I've never felt like I've gotten an answer to my prayers. Because I always felt like I did. And so it started for me when I started becoming really religious, like around maybe 13 or 14. And I would just read a lot of scriptures, and I really enjoyed that, and just felt good doing it. And I can go more into that. But yeah, I felt a good testimony from reading the scriptures and praying, and experiences in the church were good, things like that.
Gotcha. So, did you have like specific experiences you feel like sharing about what helped you to build your testimony?
Yeah. So I have like maybe 4 things. So the first thing was that reading and studying the scriptures. I was just enjoyed doing that. And it was kind of like a puzzle, putting ideas together and having those moments of clarity. And that's what was talked about often. Like the Spirit is something that brings clarity. And so I interpreted these clear moments when these confusing ideas would come together. I interpreted that as being the Spirit. And, I don't know if I could point to specific moments, but it was a lot during that phase of maybe 14 to 15 when I had a lot of those just nice, peaceful kind of things, and what people talk about with the burning in the bosom idea. Yeah. Such a strange phrase.
Yeah.
Is that the actual phrase?
Yeah.
Like, I've heard people talk about that's the root of their like evidence for the reality of the Mormon church, is they feel a burning within, but it's the actual terminology is burning within the bosom.
Yeah. I think that people just fell in love with that alliteration and never got rid of it.
Yeah. He's laughing over here.
I get a real kick out of a lot of the proprietary terminology and stuff like that. It's fun.
Well, with that particular feeling, there's this idea that's the truth claim of the church is that you pray and you read things and God will guide you through that burning in the bosom. That's one of the ways that he speaks to you. It got confusing, though, when I'd watch movies that were moving, and I'd have that same feeling, like Gladiator gave me a big burning in the bosom.
Mexican food usually gives me a burning in the bosom.
Yeah, that'll do it. And I have some ideas about what that means, but, at the time I remember noting that and being like, wait a minute, that's the same Spirit.
And this is not an approved church movie.
He's murdering people and it's rated R. Why would I be, have the feeling that this is true? And then I would say the other pillar of sort of my testimony was just connection with other people. Probably the most powerful spiritual experiences I would say that I had were just feelings of love and connection with other people. And they weren't super common, but just when you really feel like you vibe with not vibe with somebody, but you connect and you love them. That feeling of charity that the church would use, that pure love, that feeling.
So I guess I've got a question real quick and I've asked this off the record and I've asked it on the podcast before, and I still can't get my brain around, because the term testimony gets thrown around a lot, and I still don't know how to define it. Like in my head, if you held a gun to my head and said, you define what it is right now. Like the closest I can come up with is, like in sales, there's a concept of the elevator pitch, and that being the idea of like, how would you describe your business or your product or whatever the case may be in the time it takes for you to be like in an elevator with someone else. So,
Right.
30 to 60 seconds. Like, is that kind of what testimony is, or what is it? I really still don't get it. Is it like...
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys could just expound on that for me. I really still don't get this concept.
How about you take this one?
Yeah, so I'd say that's a good way of understanding that. So I would say a testimony is the conviction of the truth, and the elevator pitch is when people talk about bearing their testimony. It's stating that conviction, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the testimony itself then is the sort of the linguistic or explanation, or kind of trying to codify or make sense of the burning within the bosom, and then the bearing of the testimony is actually speaking that to another human being.
Yeah, and so if I say I have a testimony that this is true, that's just referring to all the body of experiences and things that lead to this confidence in me that this is true.
Okay, that actually is, that helps me a lot right there. That particular phrase, like, this is what helps me feel confident this is true. This is where my confidence come from, that this is true. Okay, I like that.
See, you're a lot better at words than I am, Jefferson. I'm like, it just means, it's true. Done.
I just had one other thing that I want to make sure I'm not to leave off the table for how I gained my testimony, how I got into religion more in general. And it's a counterintuitive thing, but essentially, when you're a young man and you're going through puberty, you start to have these feelings, and then you're taught that these are things that you should kind of push down, and you shouldn't touch yourself, for example. And then if you do that, you feel intense guilt. And one of the prescriptions for that is, if you read your scriptures and you pray and you sing songs, that's going to bring the Spirit into your life. It's going to push out these bad thoughts. And so really me becoming more religious was a function of me trying not to touch myself.
There are a few things that kill the mood quicker than church hymns, I would imagine.
Yes.
For me, I remember one thing really being about music, that like, don't listen to hard beat music. It will beat the spirit away, beat the feeling of the spirit away.
Yeah.
That's legitimately what I was even taught sometimes, that like heavy metal can create criminals, and most criminals in jail were attracted to that kind of music. So when then did your doubt begin and start to be cultivated?
So I think the first thing was I go on my mission, and I'm out of the Utah bubble.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounded by people who have different life experiences. And I find out that, they have their own sincere beliefs for their own sincere reasons. And so the first one is that I stopped accepting the default answers to things, and I wanted to find deeper answers to the questions of the church. The second one would be this sort of challenge that I would constantly give to people on my mission became a challenge to myself. And the challenge was, if you pray about this and God tells you it's true, would you be baptized into the church? That soft commitment to baptism.
Right.
And I was, and then that turned around on me, and it's like, oh, would I?
Mm.
So that nagged at me, and that plays out in a few ways. The third way would be finding other kinds of religion use the same truth claims that we did. Essentially, pray about this, you're going to feel it,
Right.
and that's why this is true. And so I found that we weren't unique in that way, and that
Yeah.
bothered me. And then the fourth one would be I left for survival. The perfectionism in the church was almost literally killing me. And so I gravitated towards doctrines which emphasized grace, because the church's approach towards that was smothering me.
That was the beginning of mine. Like the first part of mine. Was because I just felt so heavy with trying to be perfect for everybody, especially myself and God and everything. And I was always apologizing to God. I'm sorry I broke that promise. I would never do this again. It just sucked.
Yes, definitely.
I don't have anything hilarious to say there. I want to say that I genuinely feel terrible for the both of you. Honestly, that's awful.
Oh man, on my mission, when I got home and I took off the badge, there's like this little tiny miniature ceremony. Yeah, it's just between you and the bishop, basically, or the stake president or somebody, and you
Do
take
you
off.
do like a little like river dance or something?
You take off the badge, and you're like, okay, well, I'm officially done with the mission. But my shoulders immediately physically felt lighter. I was like, oh my gosh, it's done. Thank the Lord, it is done.
Yeah.
And I just, that feeling of pressure was relieved.
And that's supposed to, like, the idea is this is supposed to be the thing that enlightens
Mhm.
or that like brings peace into a person's life. Why would it have that effect?
Yeah, it's just heavy.
Pressure, the weight. It's and my estimation would be that really anyone within the church is having that experience and denying it. That the weight of it either is crushing them and they deny it, or they don't feel any responsibility to live up to the standards expected of them because
Mhm.
they're part of the church, and that just makes them automatically better. And therefore, it's all just sort of, ceremonial anyway.
I would argue that
Yeah.
that's not everybody, though.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm saying that they're like the ones who truly believe are the ones being crushed under the
Right.
weight of that. And until they leave, they're denying that weight exists, or they don't know it exists, or they've been convinced it doesn't exist.
Or that they're bad people because it does.
Yeah.
It's I've kind of started to look at it as there's just different personalities that interact with the doctrines of the church in a different way. And my personality was such that there's a lot of us in Elena and my in the Wicker family. We have a tendency to be very literal. So when we read something like, for example, and this one was big on my mission, Brigham Young's statement that you will be held accountable for those you might have saved had you done your duty.
Ugh.
This idea that if somebody passes me on the street and I don't talk to them, I could be held accountable for that.
I don't see any other way of interpreting that. Like, you've got to be on your best behavior all the time, and I expect 110% effort out of you.
Well, it's kind of like the scriptures in general, where there's so many different things that are said, to where if you are a certain personality, you're gonna pick up on that. You're gonna accept the challenge of that. You're gonna say, this is difficult, this is hard, and the truth is difficult. The truth is hard. It's not easy. But then if you're another personality, you might just look more at the teachings that have to do with that are softer. It's like there's a certain, because of how many different messages there are, because Brigham Young was particularly harsh, maybe. So there's other prophets that are sooner and that are more emphasized, or more recent. I mean, that I wasn't one of those people, but I used to look down on the people who kind of were more vague. It's like, because exactly your reaction is like, how couldn't you read this scripture or read this statement and do the thing you're doing? But I actually grew to be like, I wish, not I wish I was that way, but like they actually have a much more healthy interaction with religion than I did. It was toxic for me.
It's a simpler way to live is in, kind of a more passive.
Spirit of the law thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I know that when I started to sever ties with the LDS Church, um, I was terrified of certain aspects that were going to be missing from my life. For example, the promptings of the Holy Ghost. Like, I was scared to death to make my life progress without those feelings guiding me in the right direction. Did you have anything you were afraid to lose as you left the church?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of taught to you as you're given this example of if you leave, this is going to happen.
Right.
I'm sorry. Like, I'm completely in the dark there. What is going to happen?
Well, you kind of they hold up apostates as examples, and you always have these friends in high school that maybe weren't that into the church, or they left, and then they started doing drugs, they started sleeping around, they had a couple babies, their life's headed down a bad path, and so they hold up those people as examples.
So that do they imply though that because to the best of my knowledge, not even murder gets you to the level of apostasy. Like you have to kind of, am I wrong in this? It needs to be a pretty blatant rejection of the church, or you need to be like gay married. But do they seriously lord like the threat of apostasy
That's
as
a
like
different
you're heading down that
level of
road?
apostasies, like
Mhm.
outer darkness kind of level of apostasy is denying Jesus Christ as the Son of God.
What? I thought, hang on. So
Okay.
there are multiple levels to
Yeah.
apostasy then. We could hate you the most, we could hate you slightly less than these
Well,
other people
yeah,
in
there are
here.
three levels of heaven. Well, afterlife basically, and then three levels of the top tier of heaven. So yeah, definitely different levels of apostasy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I would say like apostasy is falling away from the truth, the church. You have excommunication, which is kind of what you were talking about with maybe getting gay married or doing something where the church is like, we can't associate with you anymore. You're going to get excommunicated. Then there's what Elena said, which is outer darkness, which is apparently the modern interpretation of it is it's only accessible to very few people. You have to pretty much know that Christ is real and true, and then like not know in the way that people say in church, I know this is true, but like maybe like
Seeing
see him,
him.
and then deny him. Something that intense.
Is
Yeah.
the implication there then? Because, I mean, the idea would be that every human being is created, in the image of God. And if you've been given or if you've been shown the truth or been accepting of the truth and have been able to see it, and yet you're still quote unquote evil enough to just flatly deny it, isn't that kind of just an implication that people who go to outer darkness aren't human? Why, like, how could it be possible for a human being, born equal to everyone else, to just be evil enough to commit the worst act
Yeah.
possible brazenly in full knowledge? Like, why
Yeah.
would God create a person that evil unless they're not really a person? Like, I just don't understand the logical through line that, like, a human being who's just the same as everybody else could also somehow be capable of making the worst possible decision for their own self preservation on the deepest possible level just cuz. Like, that doesn't
Yeah.
make sense.
I
No
always
one
wondered.
does that.
Yeah.
I think that is an extremely good observation. And I would say that I don't know that this is true, but I would guess, looking at how the church has used apostasy and how they, somebody leaves the church, they don't want you to listen to that person. And so they do things which make it so you're not going to listen to that person. They're outcast. They don't have the spirit with them. They're going down a bad path. I would say that outer darkness, this idea, was created or used, weaponized by the upper leadership of the church specifically to inoculate people against other upper leaders who broke off.
Didn't that happen to one in particular? Wasn't there like one within the last few decades that was like, "Hey, here's the truth, guys," and came out and was like, here's the real deal.
Oh, he's definitely going to outer darkness.
Yeah, it is. Like, I wonder, I don't know if either of you know how long the concept of outer darkness has existed. I wonder if maybe it correlates with that event. I don't know. I'm just spitballing.
Well, I think there's been a lot of schisms in the church, and especially early, and and so I don't know if this is partly me just guessing, but for example, with the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon, they essentially signed that document, and there's almost always a great penalty that comes with if they deny that afterwards. And so I really think that probably whether the outer darkness is mentioned in the scriptures or not, it seems in line with how the church has done things and how Joseph Smith did things and things to want to get people not to follow or listen to that person. And so you make them into that monster that you just said, like, how is that even possible? You make them into that monster so that no one will listen to them.
So it's othering, it's religious othering to the extreme of their I mean, essentially the implication being that they have either been possessed by a demon or were demonic at nature all along, or whatever the case may be. But the concept of like just, oh, it's all about free will, but there's just no circumstance under which creatures that have developed with the guiding principle being self-preservation deciding just like, nah, fuck this, fuck you. Everything. I'm going to outer darkness. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I was always like, okay, well, if you have seen the Son of God and you know that he exists, why would you just do that? So yeah, I get it. I never got it. But
that's like winning the Powerball and then just ripping up the ticket. Pretty much. I mean, that's how self-destructive that is.
That's true.
It's true. So kind of coming back to the idea of fears of leaving, that was a big one. It's like these friends that I had that left weren't necessarily living good lives. So just to go this one step further. So I get engaged, I'm ex-Mormon, I'm atheist, and I'm a return missionary. And I get engaged to to Brittany, my now ex-wife. And I have to imagine that her father, I was the worst kind of non-Mormon at that point. If you're just a non-Mormon, then that's something. But I was somebody who had lived it, went on a mission, and left for doctrinal reasons. That's not someone you want your daughter to marry.
And that makes you inherently evil rather than taking a moment to reflect and going, he went out one person and came back a different person. Mm-hmm. Maybe I should think critically about the circumstances for 5 minutes rather than just immediately put devil horns and a goatee on him.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I maybe put those devil horns on myself. I had a faux hawk at the time, and I think I might have had a goatee. So
they were fashionable for a while.
They were a little bit. So, Elena, to answer that question, yes, fear of going down a bad path. That's something my mom told me too. She came up, she was very helpful. And I told her I was, leaving. She came up from Tucson to talk to me, and she had a great car. We talked for like 2 days. She just wanted to understand. But then she's like, if I see you start to live in this bad way, I'm going to start to, wonder whether you're being guided by the spirit or by the devil. So there's this kind of idea. And the other main fear was I was just, you're exiting confidence for vagueness. And all of a sudden there's a whole lot of ideas, and you have this fear of like, am I going to be deceived? Am I going to know what truth is?
Right.
You no longer know how to raise your kids. You no longer know, all the easy answers aren't there anymore. And then lastly, I was afraid I was going to lose my faith in God and Christ, which I did. So
yeah. So actually on those lines, I know that you're very openly atheist now, but example, I have a mentor in my life who says that their definition of atheism is without a God, but open to the idea of the possibility. It's just simply that they don't worship a God.
But I mean, that really is textbook
right.
agnosticism, is the being open to the possibility.
Sure.
Like, atheism is outright denial. There is no God.
Really? Because
Yes.
I mean, I thought that like atheism, just the definition, means without a god.
It's
'Cause-
to be theistic means to hold a belief in a god, in some kind of supernatural, overlord or creator or whatever. And to be atheist means to reject that outright, to be the opposite of that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It is the popular thing, but the actual definition, like for example, asexual means you don't have one way or the other. You literally have no
Yeah.
drive, no orientation. So that's why they say, or at least my mentor says, I don't have one way or the other belief, which means I am open to, if ever a God was proven to be, I'm open to believe that. So those two ideas, I'm assuming then, Jefferson, that yours is not agnostic. It's the atheism level of.
Yeah, so it's interesting because this debate is had all over the place, and it's one of those things where there's a stigma associated with atheism.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like if you're atheist, you're militant. You're trying to convince people of it, and so you're going to get personal definitions that are different. I think Richard Dawkins is the one who has a scale of absolute belief on one side, and then absolute belief on the other side. And then kind of it's like a scale of 1 to 7, and you kind of see where you are. And so my personal take on it is kind of what you were alluding to, Elena, that use of the A. So if theism is someone who has a belief, atheism is someone who does not have a belief. That's the way I use it for myself. Agnosticism is one of those things where I don't find the term particularly useful, partly because we're all agnostic to a degree. Okay. So it has... Even somebody who says, I know that this is true. I mean, whatever they think they know.
Right.
But so maybe barring those people who say, I know this is true, I know this God is true, and I know God is not true. Everyone in between is agnostic to a degree in the way that I use that term and in the definitions that I've seen and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's what I mean when I say atheist is, I don't believe in God. Maybe he's there, maybe he's not.
Right.
I'm not open to the idea either necessarily. It's not like I'm searching. I have no desire.
Yeah.
I live my life as if there is not a God, and as if I'm going to die, and as if that's going to be the end. If it's not, hopefully the Mormons are right, I guess, and hopefully a lot of these other ones aren't. I'm not going to be burning in hell for eternity.
That's
But
one thing that I think the Mormons have going for them is you have a degree of heaven versus flat out hell.
or maybe not. Hopefully the Mormons are right. Maybe the reincarnation, and we're going to keep coming back. Maybe that's a better idea. I don't know.
Actually do.
Which is probably the one that I prefer. But honestly, it's hard to keep all this stuff straight. But I think it's the Catholics who have the concept of limbo, the medium place, which is, I don't know, doesn't sound terrible.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that this telestial kingdom is described, that's like this earth.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that. I like this earth.
Right, yeah. I don't need to go any higher than that.
It's fine.
Or lower.
Also, just while we're talking about it and while I've got thoughts going through my head, at some point, I do think in the future you need to actually bear your testimony to me. So I've got an example of it. Like,
Right.
I'm almost there. I'm so close. I just need to actually hear
what it sounds like.
Just go to your local church on the first Sunday of the month, right?
That is a good idea, but I would rather hear it from my wife, who I enjoy hearing things from, rather than church zombies.
That's called fast and testimony meeting, and that was the nightmare of every missionary. You did not want to have the first experience of an investigator be fast and testimony meeting because it's just all over the place.
Yeah.
So everybody that I've known who left the church, it's been a journey. It wasn't just black and white, night and day, you're done. It was a process. And in like every case that I've known, it's been a painful process. We've already kind of breached why and how, but how did it affect you, like emotionally, as you were leaving?
Maybe I'll go back to just one of those threads of how the doubts began, and that has to do with the emotional vacillation. My experience of the last 6 months of my mission was utter hell of vacillating between these spiritual highs of having a confidence that the church was true, to the next day or 2 days later having the exact opposite low of being pretty certain that this was not right. I couldn't get a grip on it. Two main points that happened had centered around general conference. So I'm dealing with these doubts, these questions. I'm studying in the morning. I'm getting answers. I'm still getting answers to my prayers. But the new information that I keep finding is not quite fitting into the careful constructs I'm building. And so I keep having to rebuild it. And so I went to this last general conference on my mission. We're watching in a member's house, and I'm fasting, I'm praying specifically for the reason of like, God, you got to tell me if this is true or not. I can't deal with this up and down.
Right.
I need some confidence. Like I trust you, but please help resolve this for me. And first session of general conference was just gold. I felt so spiritually charged. I felt confirmed. Whatever the talks were about, they were on point for me. We went out after that session of general conference. We were knocking on doors. I was amped talking to people, come back. And the second session of general conference, the exact opposite. So it was a little microcosm of that last 6 months. There were talks that were given where these careful constructs I had built to maintain my belief were all of a sudden came in conflict with the simplistic and seemingly deceptive explanations of general authorities. I sat there, and there was one specifically about one of the main ideas when you're on your mission is that the church was prophesied of, the restoration was prophesied of in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So I had gone through those scriptures carefully because I had tried to use them with smart people and it didn't work. People who knew their Bible did not accept those interpretations. So I had gone through those. I had found these sort of vague ways to understand that, like, okay, this is why it's okay that the prophet is saying that that's what it means, But then this general authority gave this simple, direct way. And I remember I just visualized this young boy sitting in the pew, feeling this spiritual confirmation. They would feel that burning of like, oh, this is the work that I'm a part of. This was prophesied of in the Bible, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to do it. And that kid was being lied to. That general authority knew that there was a more complex truth to this, certainly.
Right.
I'm pretty sure it was one of the 12 apostles. So I was crushed. General conference after my mission, I return was the second. One of the main points is it was right after Gordon B. Hinckley had died. There was a new prophet. I don't remember who it was. The prophet of my youth was gone. And long story short, similar experience. And I end up in the house that I was staying at. This was Provo. Nobody else was there. And I kneeled down and I just yelled at God, you've got to tell me where to go. I can't stay in this place of vacillation. I'm going to follow you wherever you're going to take me. If you want me to leave this church, then I'm going to do that. And if you want me to stay, then you got to calm these doubts. And that idea of Peter being on the boat and Jesus walking on the water and calling to him and saying, come to me, and Peter having to trust, looking out and like, I can't walk that. That challenge of, if God is telling you to do this, even if you don't see how it's going to happen, do you trust him? Are you going to be the rich man who can't enter the kingdom of heaven because of his possessions, the things he's not willing to give up? Those challenges are just laced all throughout the scriptures, and they just ate at me until finally I had to listen to them. So emotionally, your question had to do with the emotion of it. It was incredibly difficult. And then the moment I decided, I went up on the mountain side at Provo. The moment I decided I was going to leave, the same weight that you described lifted off of you. It was just like,
yeah.
All these questions that I have about homosexuality, about everything, politics, whatever it is, about these interpretations of these scriptures that I was trying to push into this framework, I didn't have to force it anymore. And I could just follow evidence or truth wherever it took me. And that was incredibly invigorating and freeing, and absolutely loved that.
Yeah.
I absolutely cannot believe having like that experience. To me is, I mean, I really don't, I hope this doesn't come across as insulting, but I don't mean to demean anyone or anything like that, but I hear what you just explained, and what it sounds to me like is you and Elena both having an experience of managing to break away finally from a cult. I mean, honestly, from being held prisoner, from being kept captive. Like, I can't get my brain around what that must be like. Like that life altering change that takes place, because I didn't have that. My parents were vague to the most vague level of spiritual. It's we only went to church maybe once a year, and like all of my own spiritual beliefs were just mine. They weren't passed on by a community, by parents, by really anybody. It was all my own decision.
Hmm.
So when I left, it was just kind of more like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. I'm done. Um, I like I hear you guys explain your experiences of leaving this church. It's like leaving a cult. It's like a battered wife leaving her husband. It's eh, it's like, a child leaving behind their abusive alcoholic father, whatever the case may be. Like, that's the level of detachment. That's the level of personal trauma that has to be
Hmm.
endured just to separate yourself from the greater trauma of the thing you're chained to.
Hmm.
And that's like, I can't imagine. I don't know how you guys cope.
Yeah.
You're not just coping, you're changing everything about yourself, and even at the point where I'm at now, where there's no way in hell I'd ever go back to that. I'm still trying to cope a lot with a lot of it, a lot of that old baggage and stuff, but
Hmm. Yeah, it comes up a lot.
That is something that happens for you. You still deal with a lot of the same kind of conditioning.
Ways, patterns of behavior that were ingrained in me that still, I'm still trying to figure out or becoming aware of. Just one example, I was started dating again, and so, which is kind of a fun process because these people who know nothing about this, in Texas, they get to ask you questions, and you're coming at it again. So I was telling this woman something that had nothing to do with the church. I was realizing I was out camping a couple weeks ago, and I found myself approaching groups of people. And this was out in the country, so there's a lot more conservative people. Someone had like a Confederate flag pin on their hat, and I found myself enjoying being different than the stereotype. I would walk up, I'd talk to them, I'd have a good time, we'd chat back and forth, but I would just put little things out there to make myself different all the time. I would put something out that would make me different. I'd talk pretty quickly about being an atheist, or I'd talk about my vegan ex-girlfriend, or I brought tofu to the freaking grill, um, I was thinking about that. She was asking me questions about what that was about, and I was thinking about it, and it was like, well, I really enjoy the thrill of not being liked by other people and them not understanding me. And it's like, thinking about it more, it's like I was on my mission surrounded by people who I felt misunderstood me, and I liked breaking those stereotypes and finding ways to connect with them and being different than what they expected. And I find myself now, almost oversharing sometimes because I want to be seen. And it's like, I don't know, it's just like a pattern of behavior that was something that I feel like I gained a little bit on my mission from repeatedly, day in and day out, going through that same pattern with people. Still trying to figure out all that stuff. The point is, it still comes up.
yeah.
I mean, it's that's just a very human experience. The idea of repeated patterns that you experience throughout your childhood, your teen years, your 20s, whatever, continuing to resurface, and you battle with them as a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
It is endlessly fascinating to me, and then at the same time angering that I watch people that don't deserve to have the specters of that kind of conditioning hovering around their heads, still kind of dealing with it. Whether or not you can turn that into something that's a beneficial thing to you, or something that you learn to live with just as kind of part of your personality. Maybe it's not something that was conditioned into a person. Maybe it's something that was
Sure.
just kind of brought out in you.
Yeah.
But regardless, like I watch the circumstances Elena deals with on a regular
Hmm.
basis, and it's interesting to me. It angers me, but more than anything, I want to learn about it. So at the very least, I can try and approach it rationally, I guess, instead of just being like, "No, stop doing that."
Yeah, I'm sure that's a journey of being on your side and trying to understand some of these things, and it's hard for us to understand what's going on in our head as well. I want to circle back on one thing you said, Jonathan, and Elena. You can feel free to cut this out if it's too, whatever. But what you did when you talked about a cult and named some of those things, that's one of those things that's very difficult for someone in the church to hear. They're kind of conditioned to see that cult is something that, it's one of those terms that are used by, they called the early Christian church a cult too. So it's like,
it's a pejorative.
It's one of those, it's a pejorative that's used to describe some outlier organization in the churches, an outlier organization, and they want to be. But what you're saying is absolutely is true. So discounting kind of how the membership might gloss over the use of the word cult, I think it's completely accurate. I just want to frame my experience with the church in the basic way that follows some of those lines. So you have a young boy who's brought up in an environment that's intensely surrounded by monoculture, and you have these beliefs that are emphasized. He's given an idea of this greatness that he's going to accomplish. And I'm saying he, but Elena would, is on the same part of this, although it played out a little bit differently for women and men. Then sent on a mission which is less about converting people on the outside and more about converting that missionary, because
it really is kind of like, here it is, here's the litmus test. If you come back from this and you're still we're going to put you out into the world, we're going to test you against every outside influence, and if you come back and you're still a true believer, we've got you for life. As opposed to the opposite, which was with you and Elena. You go out and you actually absorb things outside of the church, and okay, well, you're apostates now.
Yes, and psychologically, those interactions you're having with people who are on the outside of the church are negative. They don't like you. They slam the door in your face. They don't disbelieve you, and but you're still constantly surrounded by people who are on the inside, and so it emphasizes the otherness of everyone else, creates this really strong bond with this religious group, and so you entrench yourself in it, and then the church has this layout for your life, and you come back and there's younger women than you ready to jump your bones because you're a missionary or a church.
Right.
I had never identified that part of it. The idea, because the one thought that always went through my head is, the one piece of credit I can give the Mormon church is, okay, a cult typically is very insular. They busy you within the community and cut you off from things. The Mormon church takes it a step further and says, here, let us send you out amongst the wolves. And the only safety you're going to feel is in those moments when you get to have that insular, at the mission house moment. That's a militaristic concept. So in Vietnam, they came up with, terms like Charlie for the communist North Vietnamese and whatnot, to dehumanize them, to otherize them, to make them an enemy to you. It's a more subtle way of doing that. They put you out into the world and say, hey, we may lose 10, 15% of you because you have the ability to think critically, but all the rest of you are either going, the vast majority of you are going to be threatened by those external forces that yell at you at their doorstep, and you think back to the mission house, back to home as safety, and everything outside of that as dangerous. That's it. It's radicalization. It's 100% that. It's holy. This is a different level of things that I had never considered. That my brain is sitting here going crazy over.
The odd thing is that that's talked about within the church too. They'll talk about in talks that the mission is about converting the missionary.
Yeah.
But they don't say it realizing, I think, what they're saying. They say it in like as if it's a positive thing.
Like we're tempering the sword, like we're
Right.
strengthening you
Exactly.
against against the opposition you have to fight, rather than we're making you see other normal human beings as opposition.
Yeah. And I guess maybe it's a way of, you go to the States, you don't get a whole lot of baptism, so you got to think that I did something. At least I
Yeah.
converted myself. But then the experience that I had, have these vacillating doubts that come back, and I just see the hoops that are laid out in front of me that I'm to jump through. There's a risky period for the membership of when you get back from your mission. There's, it's a well-run business, so they know that there's a certain percentage they're going to leave. You're more likely to stay in if you get married, more likely to stay in if you have kids. So that's my pessimistic view of it. But
They want a harem waiting at home to ensure that to kind of hedge their bets.
yeah, you might get with somebody who's not a member, and then you're going down the wrong path, and they weaponize sex by sexual urges, both to get you more religious and to get you married. And then your life is pretty much set. And then you're working and you have kids and you can't think about stuff.
Yeah. So the whole point of this, the underlying point of my podcast here is that I know that there are people in the church terrified to walk out and entertain their questions.
Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
Yeah. I want to kind of reach a hand out to them and say, look, go ahead and think. And if you need to leave, you're not alone. You're just not. I know it's hard. I know it's hard to think that way. It's terrifying because you've got surrounding family and friends who are going to disown you if you leave the church or even start to walk away. They're going to start sucking you back in. So that's my purpose for this podcast, is to try and just reach people and say, like, look, it's okay. You're not being untrue to yourself. You're actually being more true to yourself if you let yourself think things through. But is there anything that you would say to people in the church who are questioning and considering leaving or whatever?
The most important idea that I think I came across was when I was in the temple. This was after my mission. I was in the temple. I had made it into the celestial room. I was reading the scriptures, and I did one of those things where I just like opened the book to see where it fell. It's a common thing to see what the scripture was. I don't remember what it was. I felt the Spirit, and I finally had this realization that, there's the truth claim of the church is that if you read the Book of Mormon, God tells you it's true by those warm feelings, or if you're in the temple and you have these warm feelings, or if the prophet's speaking, you have these warm feelings, that means all the rest of it is true. And so I realized that if God loves all of his children, and if I were God and I had children all over the place, and only a fraction of them have this true religion, if a Muslim boy is praying to me or he's reading the Quran, I'm going to speak to him in whatever way I can.
Right.
So I might speak to him while he's reading the Quran. That doesn't mean the Quran's true. I might speak to him, somebody else while he's listened to his imam or whatever. Well, it just immediately collapsed this exclusive idea that because I have these feelings, all the rest of it is true. And so my message to anybody who's struggling about, with doubts and things is just to trust yourself. The angst and the pain and the suffering that I went through is because I had these ideas and I had these thoughts, but I couldn't follow them through. You hear about this a lot with people, is that they're told to trust these other people. Lean on someone else if you can't lean on your own testimony.
Yep. Until it becomes your own.
Yes. You're having the thoughts you're having for valid reasons. Trust yourself. Don't take antidepressants because you're having doubts. That's one thing that I was counseled to do.
Oh my gosh.
I was depressed, no doubt. This is when I was leaving, and my fiance at the time, she wanted to help me. She knew I was depressed. And so I was prescribed antidepressants and never took them because I knew that I was depressed because I was having doubts. I wasn't having doubts because I was depressed.
Right.
And find a way to find that inner voice and trust it. And don't believe the mutually exclusive claims that because you feel one thing, that all of the rest of it has to be true. There's shades of truth in everything. There's shades of truth in every religion and every ideology. And you find those and you think critically and you go wherever the truth takes you,
Yeah.
and whatever that means.
I like that. That's good.
I can only offer what my perspective is, and my perspective is what I, as someone outside of the LDS church, take from that is just trust the way you feel about things. A person's internal feelings are more an indication of what your action should be than what someone who's not you is saying you should do.
Yeah.
That's the way I hear it. Is basically, you know, on an intrinsic level who you are better than anyone else does. They can't tell you who you are, and you need to listen to that internal compass. And that's not linked to any sort of outside force. It's linked to your own values. You need to listen to your emotions and not discount them, not try and mash them into some weird shape to fit within some rigid ideology in order for them to make sense.
Yeah. We'll leave on that. Thank you so much for joining us, Jefferson. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a good conversation.
Yeah, it was. So, per mine and Jonathan's tradition,
For real.
for you.
So,